Welcome to Thought Leader Life number 41. I'm Michael Procopio.
And I'm Mitchell Levy, and it's great to be here with my long-term friend Axel Schultze. Axel, great to have you on the show.
Hi, Michael. Hi, everybody. Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. It's awesome. It's the first time, so I'm very excited about it.
Good. Well, Axel's the founder and CEO of Society3. It's a startup and business accelerator, and he helps companies and startups focus on getting more traction, grow their user base, gain market validation. He's also GP, general partner in Society3 Ventures. In the past, he has developed, and I've known him for quite a while, developing social media management tools, and he's been the founder and CEO of Social Media Academy. It makes for the conversation we're going to have. It's going to make for a very fun session. Once again, so great to have you here, Axel.
Super.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So, Axel, what does thought leadership mean for corporations? Let's start with that question.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it has a lot to do with what we're talking about today. Thought leadership happens when corporations are able to really communicate what's mattering to them most. And when I say corporations, it's typically the leadership bench. And if they're able to communicate what really matters to them, and there's a reflection from the market on it, that's when they become thought leaders. So the interesting thing is that a thought leader cannot define himself as a thought leader. It must be the reflection of the market where people say, wow, this is really interesting. So this guy knows, whatever his area is. And when they do, they gain influence, and that's part of the topic today. And when you gain influence, you obviously have the ability or develop the ability to attract a lot of people for what matters to that particular corporation. So it's a very critical marketing tool, but it's also very critical for everybody, the customers and everybody around them, to understand, okay, what is it actually what these guys are doing?
Thanks, Axel. And I'm going to come back to that because you talked about the executive team being the focus of thought leadership and influence, but we're kind of talking about the democratization of influence, because that's kind of what we when we talked about what we should cover today. So what does democratization of influence mean to you?
Okay, it's an interesting thing about influence in general, I think, particularly in the last couple of years. With the event of the internet and then on top of the internet, social media, it looks like that at least theoretically everybody can gain way more influence than ever before. I mean, in the old days, in the dark age, people got burned on a stake if they said something that was not appropriate, like Bruno, who actually discovered kind of the universe, but that wasn't cool enough for the church, so they simply burned him down because he refused to say no. Well, actually, my thoughts were wrong. That has changed with any kind of democracy in general, but what we have today is actually the ability to communicate everybody on their own. There has been a lot of thoughts about we'll all become publishers, particularly around social media, and we actually do. And now when we become publishers and we can publish our thoughts, literally on a global scale, we become more influential. And so democratization of influence means that theoretically everybody can have massive influence around the topics and the things that matter to them the most, because as soon as they have something, they may be recognized as an influencer. And so democratization of influence means everybody could. And back to the question now, the interesting thing on the corporations is that, particularly ones with lots of employees, lots of smart people, hopefully, all those people who have subject matter expertise in a product, in a market, in finance, everywhere, could become way more influential by actually communicating with the rest of the world what their thoughts are and get feedback. And so high-speed learning is one of the things that democratization of influence brings to all of us.
So I like the use of the word could, and because I often say this to people, just because you can doesn't mean you should. But in this particular case, if the executive team of an organization has a goal, a plan, if the company has thought leadership in the marketplace, it is truly reflected and influenced, significantly increased by the employee base.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. And so, for instance, companies take Zappos, for instance. Zappos is a shoe dealer, basically an online shoe dealer, but the whole team is active publicly in Twitter and Facebook and so forth, communicating with their customers, and every piece of communication, as long as it's public, can be seen by so many others. So it's not just Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos, but actually the entire team who grows influence into their market space. And the result we have all seen. I mean, the company were competing with hundreds of others who sold shoes online, but Zappos basically became the dominant player in the space because people like the way they can communicate, they can learn from them, and vice versa. They know that their, meaning the influence of the customer, is actually recognized by the company, and the company, takes it back and says, oh, wow, okay, we probably need to change this or that.
So what's interesting about that story, right? So we mentioned a name. We mentioned Tony Hsieh. But it's not what Tony did by himself. It's Tony's management team that set up an infrastructure and process that encouraged the employee base to be able to communicate. It's what the people in human resources, in finance, in accounting, in marketing, in sales, in customer service, it's how everyone communicated a message that was all around the customer being happy, that you can't just have, it's not just tops down anymore, right? It's everyone, right? It's the entire company. And I think Tony did something which Jeff Bezos recently adopted as well, which was, if you don't want to work at my company, let me know and we'll pay you to leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there's an interesting dynamic, and we've seen this in so many companies. Thought leadership starts at the leadership and trickles down, and if the leadership doesn't lead that path, also in communicating with the market, then the rest of the company may have even trouble. So we have seen one company where every tweet they tweet should at least theoretically go through legal. I mean, can you imagine what that communication looked like? It's basically zero communication. And those companies have a hard time to become thought leaders and become actually very influential in the market, because if you don't communicate, well, there is no reason why everybody can think of you as a thought leader and can even like you as a product or company. So the leadership team plays a very important role in embracing thought leadership and embracing communication, and actually out of that comes embracing influence and even democratization of influence. I mean, companies who allow influence on every level embrace democratization of influence, and as a result, the more people basically talk to the market, the more louder it gets, the more communication happens, and out of that comes a brand that is typically very well respected versus a brand where people say, yeah, I don't know, I mean, I'm going to buy this thing because I have no other choice, but that's really it. Yeah.
So when you talk about, let's say, legal monitoring, monitoring Twitter, Twitter content before you share, because obviously, yeah, that's just crazy. But that sounds a lot like industrial age thinking. There's yes or no, and legal needs to approve it. I assume what you would recommend is that you put social media monitoring in place, and you potentially, after the fact, if people said stuff that you didn't like as much, you would sort of train them to do better, but you don't stop them up front.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there was an interview a couple of years ago from Whole Foods, the food store, and the interviewer asked the marketing manager, who was also the quote-unquote social media manager, said, it's amazing what you're doing. It looks like that everybody in your store can tweet anytime anything they want. And the response, I thought, was just to the point. They said, you know what? Our employees talk to customers every single day on the cash register when they walk through the store and so on. We don't monitor what they say, and we don't tell them what they have to say. We want them to communicate with customers. This is wonderful. And now we take that communication on a level that everybody can follow the conversation. So how cool is that for us as a company? And so, I mean, even in economically really difficult times, Whole Food was also with a, the nickname is a whole paycheck because it's very expensive. Still, the company was thriving because people love the way this company actually works and how they can touch it, they can reach to them, they can communicate with them. So makes them, I mean, by far a better company than those, careful, oh no, we don't do that, we need legal to approve it. This is so terrible, in my opinion.
That is such a beautiful comment. I don't know if I remember that, or if I remember it, I didn't put two and two together. So very beautifully said, because I'll often say that 60% of your organization should, quote unquote, be thought leaders. And what that really means is they're communicating effectively. 100% of the organization needs to be engaged in the company. But anyone who talks to a customer should be able to talk to a customer either in person, like in the Whole Foods, or online, right? It just seems obvious to me.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what are some of the tools that you are? I mean, because you're heavily involved in the tools that you have of helping to push influence. What are some of the tools you recommend companies think about and use? And obviously you could share your own as well, but what are things that companies should be focused on?
Yeah, I think the very first thing is not so much the tool itself, but the way people think about themselves as potential influencers, potential communicator. If you have something that you stand for, if there's something that matters to you, I mean, almost regardless what it is, that's the first step. And when you have that, then communicate it. And communication is today, obviously, the major networks, whether this is Twitter, Facebook, Quora, LinkedIn, I mean, excuse me, all the good names. So communicating on those platforms is really the first step. Now, one of the things I hear people often say, oh, I'm not really good at writing. I can't write a blog post. I comment once in a while, but I'm not really good at putting my thoughts together. I mean, I'm very passionate about X, Y, Z, but I have a hard time to communicate that. Well, I always tell them, one of the most influential people are those who are in media. And media is typically super influential. I mean, whenever a war starts, the government tries to own the media, the communication channels, TV, radio, newspapers, anything, because those are the most influential channels. But guess what? Media doesn't produce anything. Media doesn't think about anything. Media takes what's out there and communicates, basically plays it back to the audience. So now if somebody is really engaged about something, and you can't write about it, well, take on what's cool there and play it back to the audience. Make maybe a comment to it and play it back, meaning simply retweeting, sharing it. And there are people who retweet and share and do all the good stuff around a very specific topic. And the interesting thing is they become thought leader too by simply sharing all the things they found interesting around them. We also call this curating. So they curate that content and they become influential through doing this, very much like a publisher. And like we said in the beginning, I mean, we all are publishers now, so we become influential. And if we take that now into the company, back to your question, Mitchell, when we take this back into the company, there is a lot of huge and very cool content. Now, those who can't blog because they feel they can't write, that's fine too. Just take what's out there. We all know how difficult it was to get, the frickin' data sheets, excuse my language. There was a hunt for it. And so now we have the ability to share that. And tools on top of that, I mean, there's Hootsuite is probably a very cool tool where you find all kinds of information and put it in Hootsuite and share it there. Other tools are buzz tools, including our own, without featuring it too much. But you can do that to amplify content even further by asking all your friends spread the word. I mean, one of the things about viral marketing in general is how do you actually help somebody else spread the word? So, like Mitchell, if I ask you, we have a cool event, you're a friend of mine for, I don't know how even long, I mean, years and years, would you help spread the word? You would probably say, okay, sure, Axel, I'm helping you. But what would you actually do? I mean, you would not do an advertising campaign, and of course, you would probably not even do an email shot. But when I give you a tool like Buzz to help others in my vicinity to spread the word, then you share it basically on your social networks, and that means effectively you share it with your network. So those are pretty cool tools. I mean, one of the first tools we developed about 3 years ago was to cover a unique problem on influence and democratization of influence. We thought we need to help people to become more influential, but one of the foundation is actually that everybody knows where you are. So this little tool, we're just redoing it actually and starting a crowdfunding campaign next week. But the tool helps you to aggregate all your online presences, like your profile on Quora and on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and Facebook, and what have you. And it's interesting that most people think of themselves as, I have Facebook, but this is only for my friends. I have LinkedIn, that's my professional profile, so I would share that. Twitter I do once in a while, so why do I need a tool for even share my entire presence? Well, people are also on TripAdvisor, for instance, or answering questions on Quora. They're on Google+, and so when you think about it, the places and spaces you do something become more and more and more. Now, if you can find a way, and that's what we did actually with that tool, if you can find a way to share your entire online appearance, then you don't need to promote it anymore. And if you share it and you share your content, so people who prefer one network over the other can actually find you wherever you are, and that becomes that mechanism of being influential by publishing, and even if it's just resharing and retweeting. But if you share all the places and spaces and people find you there, then without having your own personal unique content, you can become more influential. And so the online appearance, hence the new name of the product, Appearo, the online appearance is one of the critical first steps. Let people know where you are. And then share things that matter to you and your company, and then augment that content with your own thoughts. And if you do this constantly, I mean every single day or every other day, you become basically more influential almost automatically, because you will always find people who share your interest and think this is actually valuable what you're doing, and people who are thinking that and like what you're doing, they respond back to you and you respond back to them, so you develop a conversation. And that's the point where you can be literally globally influential. And people who have these large networks have friends all over the place.
Yeah, no, I agreed, Axel. But remember, what's important to think about is it's not just one avenue coming out of a corporation, right? Mm-hmm. If you got 1,000 employees, there could be potentially up to 1,000 people who are talking online who represent your firm.
Absolutely.
And what companies need to recognize is the importance. If something happens, if a particular event happens, good or bad, you mentioned war before, you want to have established influence and relationships with reporters, media, elsewhere, not the day of the event, but for weeks, months, years ahead of time, so that when something happens where your company can be involved and they want to start talking to people at different levels of the organization, that it's easier to reach them and get their opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so the part, and this is the beauty of social media, and in the term it says already, social. So when people, I mean, let's take the company with 1,000 employees. When the people with a company with thousands of employees, if they have 1,000 people who build relationships to not only to their personal friends, but also to their business friends, also to media, to everybody that matters to them. And again, it's important to know what matters to them actually. That if something goes wrong, and these 1,000 employees can all in their own very personal way say, sorry, that was really bad, or oh, I just realized that this happened. I try to figure out what was going on. I mean, a very natural, very social way of communicating. You can clean out that mess basically within an hour or two before it even goes really wild and into the press. Because if people already recognize, yep, we made a mistake, or I will try to help, oh, sorry, I didn't even know. I mean, all these kind of typical, very normal behaviors, well, there is nobody who can say, oh, this is so bad, this is so bad, this is so bad. Because people said already, yeah, it's bad, sorry, we're trying to fix it. So this prevention is possible at the end of the day only if you have really a massive organization, if you have a massive number of people within your vicinity that are actually helping you. And if not, you get grilled.
So the training, I think, first of all, there should be a social media policy in place. Largely the policy is, not necessarily the guidelines of absolutely don't do ABC, right? You don't want the law firm going to minute detail. But you want to be able to say, hey, let's not talk about topics which really might offend our customer base, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the important part is ongoing encouragement of the organization of being able to talk online to influence the marketplace, right? Because you now have democratization of influence. And I think what's important, if you're thinking about it from the back end, I think it's important that the executive management actually recognize the employee base, those employees that are doing a good job, that are having influence. I mean, we talked about the 1,000-person organization. Imagine the 440,000 organization of IBM. And having that, I mean, that's just a huge number. Imagine having that organization be able to socially cover in a uniform measure certain parts of the marketplace. I mean, that's an amazing dominance potential of their ability to get a message, get a feeling, get an approach out. And it's such a great opportunity. And so we just, companies like that just need to figure out how to pull it all together.
Absolutely, yeah. And so coming back to the policies, so when we helped in the Social Media Academy companies to develop that in the first place, we'll always ask them to call it a social media guideline versus a policy. And the other thing which we help them to think through is when they develop one, they don't want to develop one tops down. Management has approved this, whatever you call it, but actually work it with a team. So when the team is involved in the guideline, well, that has a double, power, so to speak. One is, they have ownership, which is a good thing, and second, they can communicate it much easier within the company versus, here's, by the way, our policy or our guideline and so on. But I totally agree. It would make sense to help the teams, and I think most of the large companies today they have that, but the mid-market is still quote-unquote underdeveloped in that regard, and we see this, that the mid-market is, for instance, using social media much less than larger corporations. And here comes again, I mean, when we talk about democratization, obviously it would be nice for the mid-market because we need, as a society, we need that mid-market. It would be nice for them to recognize the power of communication and influence, because that's what they need. They need to fight, basically, or compete with large organizations. Today, everybody competes on a global scale. So for the mid-market, I would say it's actually really necessary to better understand how they can use these tools and how influential they can get by using those tools.
Wow. You just gave me a nice aha moment. All of a sudden, I realized you're and surprisingly, I have not heard this before, but you're absolutely right, right? Because you got the small startup, nimble companies, these 5-person companies that appear huge because they're using social effectively. You've got the
Yeah.
large companies that have the money to spend, and although they may not be effective at it, some are and some aren't, they're at least spending the money and getting out there. And then you've got, you're right, this mid-market set of firms, and all of a sudden a whole plethora of companies started sort of popping in my head where they're just so clueless. So they don't necessarily have the money to spend willy-nilly, but they also they're not taking a stand to make it happen. What a great
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah. If you look at these companies, let's say 100 to 500 employees, which I would consider, a typical mid-market company. I mean, they're not only competing with the big boys, so to speak, but they also have the budget limitations. Now, if they can mobilize their, let's say, 250 to 500 people to communicate to the market, and each of them has maybe 500 to 1,000 followers on Twitter and, a couple hundred connections, well, all of a sudden their so-called reach goes actually into the millions. So they could use their team very well, very efficiently, at no cost to communicate to the market and compete with the rest of the world in a very fair, competition. When we look into Europe, for instance, I mean, Europe, it's interesting stats. I just read this a couple of weeks ago. In Europe, about 70 to 80%, depending on the country, of the employees are employed by small companies, and only 20% work for large global enterprises. Well, in Europe, with some exceptions, they have a pretty stable economy, and in those countries, particular Germany and the Nordics, the mid-market is even higher relative to corporations, and those are the most rich and the most wealthy economies today on the planet. In the U.S., for instance, it's actually the opposite. 80% of employees work for enterprises and only 20% in the mid-market. So if we can help the mid-market, these 100, 200, 500, up to 1,000 employees, depending on who defines the rules, if we can help the mid-market to be more influential, we not help only innovation because they're typically more innovative, but we help our entire economy to stabilize better than we have today. One of the things I have to say real quick, what a little bit frustrates me when I look on a global scale, and I'm traveling literally around the globe, the food prices in the U.S. has grown significantly in the last 10 years. I mean, food is very expensive. Now, when we look at some of the reasons, then there is a very disturbing development. I mean, our food basically comes from literally 10 producers. All these 10 producers are giants. And when we look into Russian economy, the old world, it was basically a controlled market where it isn't, I mean, unfortunately, we don't have a communism here, but we have the same pattern of very, enable companies to be flexible. They're so gigantic that small companies would really help to steer up the market a little bit and create more competition, create the customer experience what we're all looking for, rather than having to deal with somebody we just never heard anybody say anything to us. So I think it would be very interesting to help the medium-sized companies, help our economy, help them grow, help the innovation, help stabilize our economy, and on top of all, developing that kind of influence they need is actually coming at almost no cost. I mean, maybe some consultants helping them a little bit, but it isn't that ongoing, millions of dollars flowing into advertising. Is actually just engaging their own team.
So let's do one quick thing before we wrap up. If a mid-market CEO, CMO, a C-suite person's listening or watching, what are the top 3 things they need to start tomorrow to focus on to sort of move along?
I think the first thing they need to understand is that social media isn't just a crazy tool for some hackjack people. It's really a way for them to communicating to their market, to their customers, in a way they need to communicate on an ongoing way at zero cost. So understanding to have their profiles up and running on the typical platforms, the first thing. Then understanding what they want to communicate not selling per se, but information, because they want to become a thought leader in their respective place and space, which they can. And thought leadership is not selling and pitching a product, but it's actually taking it to a much higher level and educating the ecosystem, the community, the customer base, why they're doing certain things, what is their long-term view, where is the industry going, what is the economic impact of their business, why they select employees the way they do it, and so forth. That makes them a very attractive company down the road, again, at no cost. So if they're online available, if they communicate and understand their thought leadership position, I think those even just two things are what they can do tomorrow. I mean, there's no reason, there's no financial discrepancy between what their plans are and what this is now, because it's at no cost. It obviously takes a little bit of time, and they believe they don't have time. But, well, we all have 24 hours a day, every single one of us, democratization of time in this case. So they do have the time, and they take it and say, okay, I'll spend 30 minutes every day in communicating to my ecosystem online. That would go a long way.
I like it.
All right, well, before we wrap up, I want to thank our sponsor, ThinkAha. ThinkAha turns experts into thought leaders, and they do this in a variety of ways. They publish books in a number of formats, and they have the AHA Amplifier, which you can take a look at ahaamplifier.com. It's a free tool. And it's a great way to get content to be available for your advocates and future advocates to share. And the latest thing they've got is you can have a show just like this one where you interview thought leaders in your area to increase your influence. So with that, Axel, is there anything that we didn't ask you that we should have?
Well, actually, there's one little thing. Actually, that was somebody asking me just a few days ago. Said, if everybody has influence, would that basically make influence itself kind of void and go away? And I had to think about it a little bit, and I think no. The more people have influence, the faster we learn from all these people, and even if all the 7 billion people would be highly influential, we would have massive inputs from 7 billion people, and we can only hear to so many anyway. So I think having much more influence, everybody, is definitely something we should thrive for.
All right, Mitchell, any last words from you?
Oh, Axel, before I say anything, how do people get a hold of you if they're interested in contacting you directly?
Well, the easiest is probably type in Appearo, it's like Appear and then oo.com/Axel S, my first name and the initial of my last name, or on Twitter, Axel S, LinkedIn, Facebook, anywhere. I mean, I'm pretty much all over. But in Appearo.com, you find all the places and spaces on one link.
Got it. Great. Thank you. Yeah, and that's what that's one of the many things that your tool does, is help pull things together.
Yeah.
I've always appreciated your worldview, Axel, and I like who you are and what you do. I love the fact that you're actually shooting the show from your boat, which is the background that you see here. So very, very cool indeed. And you've given me a very interesting idea and thought. Right? It's a market that's not being addressed well enough, and it's the education and rollout of social and thought leadership, basically influence in the mid-market. And also 5 or 6 products popped in my head in terms of things that would make sense, that would be appropriate, and hopefully those that are listening also had these visual cues that came out of the conversation. So thank you so much for your time. It was really really a worthwhile session. Enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I mean, it's always a pleasure working with you, that one in particular. And yeah, I mean, can't get more thankful for having me here. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on Thought Leader Life, and we'll see you next week with another episode.
All right. Appreciate it, Michael. Appreciate it, Axel. You guys have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.